Hello there, listeners of the Bylines Network podcast. We are AI free for now. I'm Julian in Bristol.
And I'm Chris in London.
First episode of the year, Chris. And how are we feeling?
Do you know that meme of Ben Affleck stood outside of a house looking really tired, smoking a cigarette?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the third week of January, and knowing we still have the rest of the year and another 3 years of a Trump presidency, that's how I feel. Um, Minus the cigarette, obviously. But Happy New Year!
Happy New Year! Is it happy?
Is
Like,
it happy?
because, oh, what did it take this time? It, I think the record for fastest things have messed up was 2017, when it was literally the first day and a YouTuber filmed a dead body on literally the 1st of January. What was it this year? 3 days of peace?
Yeah, I mean, it was 3 days before, the US decided to kidnap the leader of a foreign country and take him to America to put him on trial in American court. But of course, we are talking about the United States is kidnapping of Nicolás Maduro, the president of Venezuela, on the 3rd of January. So what a way to kick off the new year.
If you'll allow me to go on a bit of a tangent, around that time, I did some reading about the Korean War. There is a point to this. And there was a moment in the Korean War where it's obvious that the Chinese forces were just about to join in. They were gathering at the border. The USA was like one final push up from getting rid of the communists in North Korea. And General MacArthur goes up to, I believe it's Harry Truman still at the time, and goes, "Hey, can I nuke the Chinese, please? Let me do it. I want to do it. I want to do it so badly." And Harry Truman side eyes him and tells him no. And the main reason behind this is because he knew that this would set a precedent, not just for how nuclear weapons are used in a war, but also for how because this is like the first war in this quote unquote new world order of international law. If he uses nuclear weapons, this will set not just a precedent for how other countries will use nuclear weapons, because the Soviets were just about to set off their explosions first, and the Brits were on their way. But it also would have set the precedent for how international law is perceived, because he wants an international law era to start. So he didn't, and because of that, there hasn't been a single use of nuclear weapons in warfare since 1945, and we don't use chemical warfare willy-nilly now because of it. And I can't help but feel, as Mark Carney said, that the old world order is dead now because a foreign power kidnapped a dictator of a foreign country. Because he was a dictator of a foreign country, but he was still the leader of a foreign country.
I think, and we've seen politicians sort of in the immediate aftermath of that sort of scramble to respond to it, because that I think the phrase that the British government or the sort of catchline they adopted was "We shed no tears" at the end of the Maduro regime. However, this is a very problematic move, and they it wasn't just they sent in a sort of very limited strike like group of soldiers to extract the guy. Yes, they did, but they also conducted a very large scale military sort of bombing campaign on the
In the
capital.
Caribbean.
Yeah, it wasn't sort of and the American military are the one like the biggest in the world, but also very, very well trained. There shouldn't have been a need to sort of use such sort of, even though it's very limited, the extent of the bombing that took place probably unnecessary. Um, Obviously, I'm not privy to the exact details and the intelligence of what they had. Although, look, the photographs released from the operation, where you had the defense secretary like in the Situation Room had a TV in the background with X open, and like in the search bar, you could see Venezuela. So, one wonders where the intelligence for that actually came from. But it was very out of the blue. There were signals. There was quite a large military buildup of United States assets off the coast of Venezuela. The US had seized a fair few of the oil tankers that had been carrying Venezuelan oil, which had been sanctioned. Um, but this was huge. And then in the immediate aftermath, let's not forget, Trump basically said, I'm going to run Venezuela until such a time that I think there's somebody adequate to take my place. And we're sending in our massive oil companies to also help run the country. It's like you're not even hiding that this is about oil, like a major motivation, but this is about
No,
oil.
he's
Wait,
not. And even more hilariously, everyone else around the time was pretending it was. Like there were like immediate interviews at Air Force One where he's surrounded by all of his allies, and they were doing the whole 2003 Iraq excuses again. Oh, we're overthrowing a dictator. It's a threat. It's a threat to the American people. Fentanyl's the new weapons of mass destruction. And you just have Trump going, and we're going to take the oil. I kind of respect it because at least they're not going through the whole hullabaloo that we literally went through in 2003. But it's still kind of horrifying.
but I mean, the big alarm bell was sort of when he was sort of giving a statement in the run up or aftermath of it. I can't remember exactly what day it was, but he was referencing the Monroe Doctrine,
No, 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 no. The Donroe Doctrine.
The Donroe Doctrine. Sorry, but that's a reference to the Monroe Doctrine, which essentially means that, and this is from sort of almost when was it, the 1800s, I think.
It was basically telling the great European powers, hey, stay out of South America. That's my turf.
Yeah, and the essential sort of, the underlying current and message from that is anything in the Americas is fair game for us because it's in our backyard and we will do what we want. And for obvious reasons, the world hasn't worked like that for a very long time. And it should never work like that. Uh, and so there lies the problem. You have the world's biggest military power deciding to take over a country by force, and then afterwards saying, well, there's Cuba and we don't really like the guy running there. And there's a few other countries that, we're a bit iffy about. So who knows? It's just crazy. And then, developments afterwards sort of knock that off the agenda somehow because, it's Donald Trump and he manages to do that.
It really does say a lot about what happened this month when we say America overthrowing a foreign dictator and installing their own puppets in that state is not the most insane thing that happened this month.
Do I'd love to live I just want to go back to a time where, you know, on a regular basis, it wasn't in unprecedented news or, um,
To quote a quote that's often attributed to Lenin, there are some years where nothing happens, and then some days where years happen.
and I feel like we're recording this on the 27th of January, and I feel like there's already been several years crammed into this,
Yeah.
into those 27 days.
So, God, what happened on the American side? So obviously Venezuela, then Greenland and the effective killing of the NATO alliance, because as far as I'm concerned, NATO's dead now. And it's just a dead rubber that's in its place. And then the stepping up of ICE in the United States, I believe, was next, resulting in the killings of two US citizens. Ah,
Yeah, and I mean, we'll start with Greenland, shall we? Uh,
if we
so
must.
if we must. So, in the immediate aftermath of what happened in Venezuela, there was a huge intensification of rhetoric around um, the US taking Greenland, which, and I'm sure most people know this by now because it has been so amply covered by news outlets over the past few weeks, is an autonomous territory of Denmark. So it's not, a free for all, unclaimed bit of land in the middle of the sea. It is the sovereign territory of a country that is a member of NATO and the European Union. Um, for weeks, there was this rhetoric of we need Greenland, we need it for our own national security. Again, and Greenland, you can argue if Trump's sort of using the Monroe Doctrine to back up his foreign policy, that Greenland isn't really in America's sphere of influence because it is a fair way away. But of course, again, the common trend, if you look back to Venezuela, is Greenland is a host to a load of very valuable natural resources.
I'm fairly certain that the chances that Donald Trump wants Greenland because of the Mercator projection is not zero.
The what?
The Mercator projection. Basically, because the Earth is a globe, you can't really flatten it out all that well and have it be accurate in any way, shape, or form. So the Mercator projection is the best way that we can map the world on a flat surface. However, it tends to stretch countries out. Greenland's not that big. It's actually tiny. The only countries that have really survived in terms of like their relative shape are ones that are like below the equator. So if you were to look at the Mercator projection, you'd assume that Greenland is larger than Australia. It's not. Australia is the largest island in the entire world. And I honestly cannot tell you for certain that Donald Trump wants it because the Mercator projection makes it look so big. It's tiny. I'm pretty certain that Greenland has fewer people in it than Bristol.
The Prime Minister of Greenland also attended the protest, and participation was estimated at 5,000 people, which is about 25% of the capital city's population alone, which is huge. Like, imagine 25% of the population of London going on a protest. Proportion wise, that's mental. That so the movement is called Hands Off Greenland, and that protest, I think 2 weeks ago, was the largest in its history.
So yeah, the the president then spends a good couple of weeks drumming up this whole, oh, we need Greenland, and we're going to negotiate with Europe to just give it to us, and if they don't like it, then we're just going to land our forces there, leading to several European countries sending troops there, or in the United Kingdom's case, a person there. We sent one guy. And I like to think that he just rolled up with like an AR-15 and like a couple of cans, just said, right, where's the enemy, lads?
Well, that there was some confusion over that because the the Trump administration, I think specifically the president, thought that that was them saying, well, screw you, we're sending our military here, so you can't have it. But actually, what then sort of you saw the walk back of quite a few NATO countries, and they were like, this is a normal military exercise. We do this all the time. And it's like, but I mean, this is also a side point. We sent one person from our military there. I'm not necessarily saying that we should have sent several hundred, but just one.
He, it, uh, if I remember correctly, it was a military advisor who had trained with a fair few troops that were used to snowy conditions. So it's not as silly as it sounds. It's still pretty silly.
But it did mean that a few days later, Donald Trump posted on his social media platform saying, if I don't get Greenland, I'm going to put tariffs on the UK.
The UK, France, Denmark, Germany, and I think a couple of the other Scandinavian countries.
Yeah. So, what you saw, and it was fascinating to see the international response to the like sort of heightened like rhetoric and language from the US because for so long, especially here, and you see it with the way that Keir Starmer has dealt with Trump. He's been the charmer, you know, um,
The Neville Chamberlain.
yeah, like I mustn't criticize him openly. I must reiterate the importance of the special relationship at all times and refer back to that every time someone says, but he's doing something wrong. Why don't you say so? And it came to Greenland, and there were very unequivocal statements from the UK government saying this is not okay.
You know that you have messed up badly when Keir, I have scars on my backside from the amount of fence sitting that I've done, Starmer, takes up a side against you. Like the first thing that he did after Venezuela was say, nothing to do with us. Oh, by the way, I think we need to reset our relationship with Europe, which I still do not find a coincidence. And then a couple of days after the peak of the Greenland incidents, he was saying, nope, Greenland belongs to the Greenlandic people and it's their future to decide. And they very clearly say we don't want to be Americans. Hands off Greenland, please, Dom. The end of
And
it, though, was hilarious because he, Donald Trump swaggers into Davos where he's supposed to give like a 20-minute speech. Instead, he does the speech and then rambles on for a further 40 minutes about why Greenland is ours and we're special and we're Americans and we need it now.
but I think the explicit thing that we've not we've implied it, but we've not mentioned it, but it is worth mentioning because it is absolutely insane, is that for weeks the American administration, including the President of the United States, refused to rule out using military action, like invasion, like an invasion of Greenland. And there was this constant sort of and it's obviously fake. Like what Donald Trump was saying was, oh, in Greenland their military is only two sled dogs, and that was it. And it's like, well, that's not true because there's American bases there, quite significant ones actually, and um obviously the Danish military has a presence there too. But it was
He
the fact
then
that
tried to justify it by saying that America held Greenland during the Second World War and that's why we need Greenland. And Denmark's case is invalid. And this is the hilarious bit. Denmark's case of sovereignty over Greenland is invalid because you can't claim sovereignty over a land just by landing ships there. This man has very clearly never read any American history book because that's the entire basis of American sovereignty over America.
is it though?
Yeah, they literally landed the Mayflower there and set up colonies and just went, oh, this land's ours now.
Didn't we do that?
Yeah, but then they eventually became Americans.
Yeah, but it's the British people's fault. He like he that's
I'm starting a new movement of make America British again. M-
but
Mather.
I mean the core point of this is that you had the United States not ruling out using military action to seize again sovereign territory.
Not of a country that has given any kind of threat to it, but
Mm.
of a decades long NATO ally.
And again, something that really did result in significant criticism for Donald Trump was in the sort of immediate, I think it was sort of just after Davos or during Davos, he was doing an interview with Fox News and he basically went, what do we need NATO for during Afghanistan? All those soldiers, the British soldiers, the European soldiers, they didn't go anywhere near the front lines. They stayed back. And that resulted in really significant criticism and explicit criticism from British politicians, and understandably so. I think you had Keir Starmer calling his comments appalling, which is the strongest language that we would have ever seen from Keir Starmer criticizing the President of the United States, and quite rightly so.
I'm not much of a pro-military man, but the idea that British troops, I can't really speak for other NATO troops, but I'm almost certain that they were there. But the idea of calling British troops non existent when there was something like 470 odd people who died for the only time that Article 5 was triggered by the Americans, by the way, genuinely gets me riled up. Like, people fought and died for the special relationship that he is currently dragging through the mud.
That, I mean, it just, what he said, it just wasn't, it's not factual either. Like, and he does this so often, but when you're exactly as you said, it's the only time that Article 5 has ever been sort of invoked. And you can argue over the motivations for going into Afghanistan in the first place, and the way that that operation was conducted, and that's by the by. But to say that, NATO countries didn't, like, they stayed back and they didn't do anything. I was a kid when soldiers were in Afghanistan fighting, and it was on the news every day, and it felt like every day, or very very regularly, there was another British soldier has died, another British soldier has died, and I remember that so vividly. And whether or not you agree with the motivations to send troops into that space, the fact that people died for that relationship, backing America, because that's ultimately what it was. And for the president of the United States to poo-poo that and say, well, they didn't do anything, we did all the heavy lifting, it's absolute bollocks, and it's offensive. And
You
it,
know
it
what makes
made,
this even more offensive? The fact that it was said by a draft dodger as well.
yeah,
A
also that.
draft dodging president has the gall to insult troops, not just British troops, mind, but troops that died to defend America. I'm genuinely shocked that there is still technically a special relationship because honestly, justification enough to like end it, in my opinion. But anyway, back to Greenland. The uh the reason why I say the end of the Greenland thing was kind of hilarious is because it ended rather mutely almost. Like he did the big speech at Davos. He did the whole you can't there's no sovereign claim if you just land ships there. And then about 2 hours later, it seemed like it was resolved. Uh, with a deal that the Europeans put forward that was basically the same deal that they signed. It's just that they now can claim sovereignty over their military bases. Woo.
I mean, the other part about the Greenland sort of issue is that the US and Denmark have a treaty between the two of them on how the US can use Greenland militarily. And for the last few weeks, there's been lots of, very clever people, cleverer than me, on the TV and the radio discussing this. And all of them point to this treaty and say, well, if the reason that America wants Greenland is for sort of military reasons, they already have that right. And they could open like God knows how many more military bases within the space that is hospitable and habitable, which is not a lot of Greenland, let's be honest. But they can do that already without sort of taking it over as another state or overseas colony. The quite abrupt about turn was also quite a surprise. You went from this sort of furious rhetoric to, ah, we've had a deal and it's all good. Not that anyone really knows what this deal contains at the minute. All I kind of can say is it appears that Donald Trump had a meeting with the head of NATO, Mark Rutte, and he left saying, haha, I win. And yeah, we'll have to see how that develops in the coming weeks. But
What I found even more disturbing, in even more evidence that the old world order is dead, is you had the foreign secretary for Russia coming out at the same World Economic Forum in Davos saying, we don't know what Donald Trump is on about. We have no want or need of Greenland. And if Greenland is needed for American security, then Crimea is needed for Russian security. The old world order is dead. A new one struggles to live.
the issue again here is you had, like you said, you had the Russians saying, "Well, we sympathise with that argument because look, we did this to Crimea because of the same reasons." It's this idea, that oh, if we have military might, that subsedes everything else, and it doesn't really matter what the next door neighbor is doing. I'm stronger than him, so his views don't matter. International law is optional. Smaller states just don't have as much say as the larger ones next to it. It's a scary time for everybody, and we're sat here in the UK making quite strong statements. Not strong enough, I don't, in my opinion, anyway. This is a moment when you really need leadership, and you need to say where we stand. Yeah, the UK, and again, in a world of real politics, like where the US is operating in the way it is, and Russia is, the UK kind of, by comparison, is a bit meaningless. But we are, as a country, very, very good at diplomacy. Like we're one of the best in the world. That and we should be using that. And our politicians should be far stronger in their words, saying what we stand for. That we have a Labour government, for God's sake. This is not where a Labour government should be sitting. They should be criticising this kind of approach, and they haven't been as strong. And I mean, we'll talk about it a bit later, but what's happened in America with ICE as well? That's the kind of thing that the UK government, a Labour government, should be saying is wrong. We don't want to do this approach. We don't want to take this approach. This is wrong. But again, there's been nothing. So yes, there has been explicit criticism, but nowhere near as harsh as it should have been to send the message that actually needs to be sent, that this is bad. It needs to stop. Everyone needs to calm the F down, and get around the table and have a chat.
I'll tell you what, one final thing on this. If this is not evidence that we need some kind of European collective defense, then I don't know what is. Like I've said it at the start of this, I believe the NATO alliance is effectively dead in the water. And we need to find a way to replace that American security because we can't rely on them anymore. Like with every single passing day, Charles de Gaulle gets proven right.
And the thing, looking at this whole situation, you look at who's rubbing their hands with glee.
It's Russia, it's China.
Yeah. And Ukraine, which has dominated the agenda for so long, quite rightly, has fallen to sort of almost the wayside because Trump has essentially readopted the Monroe Doctrine in that I don't give a crap about anything outside my backyard. Although we look at sort of their proposals for the peace board in Gaza, and you sort of go, "Oh God,
God.
do we even start on that now?" Because that's another thing. But like going on to more the direction of America more generally, a year after a year of a Trump presidency, and you have significant unrest in Minneapolis as a result of two shootings, fatal shootings by immigration and customs enforcement officers. But I think, one of the most mind-boggling and really, and I'm not American, but the killing of any innocent person is horrendous. And when you have quite clear evidence that a state body is overusing its power, that is something everybody should be concerned by, because it isn't just America where that can happen. It can happen here. And it is happening here to a certain extent. But just people aren't being shot in the head by immigration enforcement officers.
Yeah, they're just being arrested for holding placards.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's my point. They're not the same, but the overreach by the state is happening in the UK too. But the fact that you have two fatal shootings by immigration and customs enforcement officers in 1 month in the same city, and then you have the White House press secretary calling journalists fake journalists because they have the nerve to sort of stand up and say, well, that was the reason that this person died is because um, ICE officers were incompetent and, you know, overzealous and they should have held back. And she pops off and says, "Well, you're a fake journalist. If you'd seen the footage, da 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 da." Unfortunately, we have all seen the footage because it has been all over the internet. It's not some seeing someone shot and killed is not something anyone should ever see. But it gets to a point where you have to acknowledge the reality that's facing you, and that is the reality in America. And we've seen sort of words in the last few, well, over the last 24 hours actually, where it seems that Trump is willing to be to withdraw ICE officers from Minneapolis. They've summoned, I mean, they're withdrawing the head of ICE from Minneapolis. And basically, there seems to be some acknowledgement that things have gotten way too heated and things need to calm down. But two people are dead. And that is never something that anybody should accept. This conversation should never stop in America. I mean, here either, because we should remind ourselves that it's entirely possible the same. I'm going to quickly Google and check something before I say this, but um, with the second shooting of Alex Pretty, there was reporting that he was armed
No, so he was armed with an entirely licensed firearm that he had by his side
in a
that was
holster.
removed from him when he was thrown to the ground. So he was not a threat.
Yeah,
Also, this is America. There are more guns than people there. They literally have entire organizations about protecting the Second Amendment. Then the party that's all for protecting the Second Amendment is all suddenly just like, well, you can't really be having guns at a protest when they spent so long talking and protecting Kyle Rittenhouse, who brought a gun to a protest. I'm angry. Can you tell I'm angry?
and you know the sort of the narrative around the sort of stepping back from of ICE from Minneapolis. The reasons sort of being given for that aren't because two people are dead. It's because immigration for Trump is polling wise is one of his biggest strengths. For people in America, they support Trump because he's hard on immigration. He cracks down on immigration. What the killing of two American citizens as a result of immigration enforcement does is give a sense of you don't know what you're doing. This is over the top. It's out of control, and you're incompetent. Not because really two people have died. That's not the reason that people are sort of even Trump's own base are turning away from him. It's because the narrative and the strong point that he's won on is suddenly falling apart. Because at the end of the day, and we know this, when and we it's not as extreme, but you in the UK, the crackdown on immigration resulted in the Windrush scandal. And we need to acknowledge that going hard on immigration in a way that is, you know, it's dangerous. And I mean, obviously in the UK we're not shooting people, but that showed the danger of crackdowns on immigration and you impacting this in people. The same is happening in America, but people are dying as a result. Um, and that's what I don't think the UK would ever tolerate. I don't think we would ever tolerate armed immigration officers.
Well, we might have to be because you'll never guess what one of the few things that Reform have actually said they're going to introduce if they ever get into power. It's
Don't tell me they're going to replicate American ICE.
they want to introduce their own version of ICE. You know what the scary thing is? It's
They
only the
might win this.
conservatives.
I'm not directly comparing what's happening in America to the Windrush scandal, but both of those situations are where the state prioritized enforcement and like hardcore messaging of that enforcement over the welfare of human beings and in lots of cases the law. In America, two people are dead because they were American citizens who were shot dead. In the UK, British citizens were deported to countries they had never lived in and refused entry to come back, ruining lives. So, the situations are very different. I appreciate that. But where you have the state aggressively cracking down on things like migration, it regardless of and it's because they want to win the next election, it's because they want to look hard. And we're doing it here now. We're talking about reforms to settlement at the moment, indefinite leave to remain, and moving it to sort of a merit-based system rather than a time-based system. I think that may, in this country, that may result in similar things to the Windrush scandal, because it puts things way more on a way more subjective wavelength. What counts as community contributions? What counts as, it's more, what good have you put into the country rather than taken out? And that's open for consultation at the moment, and I would encourage everybody to feed back on that because that's open still. But the point I'm making is crackdowns and aggressive messaging sweep up people who should never be involved in this. And essentially the narrative and the spin is so much of the focus that that is the messaging before you have the facts. And the ultimate result is like in the UK with the Windrush scandal, you had people deported to countries they hadn't really any connection with. And in America, you've had 2 citizens shot dead and quite a few American citizens wrongly deported. At least people who are deported are still alive and they can.
Well, alive and in an El Salvadorian prison with no promise of ever returning.
My point is, yes, in this country, it's different. We don't approach things in a similar way. But like you said, Reform and the Conservative Party are promising ICE-style immigration enforcement. We should be so worried about that. If we're having immigration enforcement officers with guns on our streets, picking up people at bus stops, that is not how we work as a country. Absolutely not. I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel uncomfortable seeing armed police officers in central London.
Normally.
Yeah, like normally, and it's okay that we have armed police officers because obviously people in this country have guns. So we need the police to have guns, but not all of them. But I still feel uncomfortable seeing the very small amount of police officers with guns that we have. If we have immigration enforcement officers running around with guns, and we already have issues with the police, why are you giving immigration enforcement officers guns? I was about to say they'd be roided up sort of security, like police rejects who've joined immigration enforcement, and they're just tripping on power, but they've been given a pistol. Like, that's not what we need.
Basically, 2026 is a bust. Start again, guys. With that healthy dose of nostalgia, listeners, we'll leave you there. Hope you enjoyed our first episode of 2026. You'll be very happy to know that we plan on not stopping at all. This year, there'll be more interviews and more episodes, actually, because we're planning to do a couple of mid-month episodes following a specific topic. What that topic is, we've yet to decide, but we're going to do it. Until then, listeners, I've been Julian in Bristol.
And I've been Chris in London.